Hi, I'm Kaylin. Have you ever looked into your sister's eyes, while your face was bleeding, your shoulder hanging out of its socket, and heard her whisper, "You should have just signed"? That night, I dragged myself across the floor, pounding on my parents' door, begging for help. And they left me there. On the porch. In the dark. What kind of family does that? And what would you do if it were yours? Because I decided I wouldn't stay their victim. When Celine invited me over for dinner that Tuesday night, she called it casual. But the second I stepped through the doorway of her soon-to-be house, I could tell this wasn't about dinner. The place still smelled like fresh paint and dust from recent renovations, the furniture sparsely staged, as if for a showing. Celine hugged me too tightly, her perfume clinging like an unwelcome guest. Declan was at the table, already pouring himself a drink, grinning like I'd walked into his office instead of my sister's home. "We're so glad you came," Celine said, her voice honey-sweet but rehearsed. "It's been too long." It hadn't been that long, a month maybe. But I didn't argue. I took off my coat, draped it over the back of the chair, and sat where she pointed. Dinner was takeout, Thai from a place downtown, neatly arranged in bowls like they wanted it to look homemade. Celine poured me a glass of wine before I could decline. Declan didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward me, his expression settling somewhere between casual and smug. "It's just a formality," he said. I didn't touch it. "What's this?" Celine leaned forward, her elbows grazing the edge of the table. "We're closing on the house soon, but, well, you know how the banks can be. They just need a little extra assurance." "Assurance," I repeated, still not opening the envelope. Declan sighed, like I was being difficult already. "Your name on the mortgage. Only as a guarantor." "It's nothing big." I finally slid the papers out. One glance told me everything. Adjustable rates, balloon clauses, deferred fees, things they either didn't understand or hoped I wouldn't notice. I'm a financial manager. Numbers don't lie. This wasn't a favor. It was a trap. "You two were denied before, weren't you?" I said, keeping my voice steady. Celine gave a small, defensive laugh. "Temporary credit issues. You know how freelance income looks on paper. It's just the banks being uptight." Declan leaned back, smirking. "That's why we need you, Kaylin. You're the responsible one. Always have been." It wasn't a compliment. It was a collar. "I don't know," I said carefully. "This kind of arrangement puts me on the hook if anything goes wrong." "Nothing will go wrong," Celine said quickly. "You think we'd let that happen to you? Your family." Family. They threw that word like a net, but I could feel myself being dragged under it. We finished dinner, though I could barely taste the food. My mind kept looping through the numbers, the risks, and their easy way of making this seem like a simple yes. I told them I'd think about it, which bought me just enough time to escape without a fight. The next day, I sat in Margie's kitchen nursing a mug of coffee while she folded laundry at the counter. Margie has known me since college. She reads me like a book. "They want you to do what?" she asked when I told her. "Cosign. Just to get them through closing," I said, though even to my own ears, it sounded like I was making excuses for them. Margie didn't bother hiding her disgust. "Kaylin, no. If you sign that, they'll drag you down with them. You're not family to them. You're collateral." I bristled. "That's not fair. They're my family." She dropped a towel in the basket and fixed me with a look. "And they're counting on you thinking that way. You're the only one who keeps showing up." "That's why they keep asking." Her words stuck like splinters. I wanted to argue, but instead I found myself saying, "I just don't want to lose them." "Maybe you need to ask yourself what you're losing by keeping them," Margie said softly. I didn't answer. A few nights later, I found myself at another dinner, this time at my parents' house. Celine and Declan were there, glowing with that smug, new homeowner energy, and my parents, Claudette and Malcolm, looked at them like they'd walked on water. Claudette dabbed at her lips with a napkin and turned to me. Celine tells me you haven't signed yet. What's the holdup? I'm still considering it, I said, carefully. Declan snorted. Considering? It's just a signature, Kaylin. You don't even have your own family to worry about. Why not help your sister start hers? It was a knife wrapped in politeness. My mother nodded in agreement, as though his point was reasonable. I stared at my plate, swallowing every sharp response that wanted out. I could already feel the room against me, waiting for me to snap so they could call me difficult. So I smiled instead, tight-lipped, and said nothing. That night, lying in bed, I replayed it all. Celine's fake warmth, Declan's smirk, my mother's silence. Was I being stubborn? Or was I finally seeing them for who they really were? I thought about every time I'd kept the peace, folded myself smaller, stayed quiet so no one would get upset. Maybe this was just one more chance for them to use me up. I told myself I'd think about it, but deep down, I already knew my answer, and I knew they wouldn't forgive me for it. And I was right. They didn't even wait a week to show me just how unforgivable I was. The invitation came by text from Celine. Family dinner, Sunday at 6. Don't be late. No smiley faces, no softening words. Just an order dressed as an invitation. I stared at it for a while before replying with a simple, okay. By the time Sunday rolled around, I'd spent all day working through spreadsheets just to distract myself. I dressed in muted colors. Something about Celine's new house made me feel like I had to blend into the walls. As I drove over, the sun was already setting, the sky over Boulder glowing pink against the sharp outlines of the mountains. I almost turned around twice, but the thought of the fallout if I didn't show up kept my foot on the gas. Their house looked different now, more lived in than when I'd been there last. Celine's touch was everywhere. Overpriced vases, glossy coffee table books no one would ever open, abstract art chosen to impress. It all screamed curated perfection. My own townhouse, with its hand-me-down furniture and thrifted finds, felt small and shabby in comparison, and I knew Celine liked it that way. Kaylin, Celine's voice rang out as I stepped inside. She kissed the air near my cheek, her arms draped in a cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Declan appeared behind her, a beer already in hand, the smell of hops clinging to him. Dinner was set in their new dining room. It wasn't even fully furnished, but they had the table staged like something out of a magazine. My parents were already seated. My mother, Claudette, gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind she reserved for moments when appearances mattered. My father, Malcolm, nodded once, his eyes dropping to his plate almost instantly. Kaylin, you're late, Claudette said lightly, though her tone cut sharper than she probably realized. It's 6 on the dot, I replied, sliding into my seat. Still, she said, folding her napkin neatly. You could try to be a little early. It shows you care. Celine smirked behind her wineglass. Declan chuckled, low and mocking. Dinner started pleasantly enough, if you ignored the undercurrent of judgment. Celine droned on about fabric samples and contractors, and my mother nodded along like every word was groundbreaking. Declan made a show of talking about his business ventures, though we all knew those ended in unpaid debts. Then Claudette turned her attention to me. Kaylin, she said, smiling sweetly, you're always so independent. But don't you think it's time you do something meaningful for this family? Help your sister get her footing? You don't even have your own family to think about. The words landed like a slap, even though she delivered them as though they were kind advice. My father stayed silent, staring at his plate. He always stayed silent. I forced a smile. I'm just being careful. These are big decisions. Declan snorted. Careful, he repeated, shaking his head. You mean stingy? Declan? Celine said lightly, though there was no real reprimand in her voice. He leaned back in his chair, twirling the beer bottle in his hand. You think you're better than us, don't you? Sitting there with your fancy job, acting like you know everything because you work with numbers. You're just a glorified bookkeeper." The tension thickened instantly. My mother's fork froze midair. Celine didn't even try to intervene. I stayed calm, though I could feel my hands tightening in my lap. "I just want to make sure it's financially sound," I said evenly. Declan slammed his bottle onto the table so hard that beer splattered across the tablecloth and dripped toward my plate. The sound made everyone jump. "Financially sound," he barked. "You think you're some kind of genius? You'll sign, Kaylin, one way or another." His voice was low, but the threat in it was unmistakable. As Celine reached out, touching his arm as if to soothe him, but she didn't look at me. Her silence said everything. She agreed. My pulse thudded in my ears. I wanted to scream, to throw my napkin in his face, to demand my parents say something, anything. But I didn't. I swallowed every word and smiled tightly instead, like I'd done my whole life. This wasn't about helping them. This was about control. And I'd been blind to it for years. I excused myself shortly after, muttering something about needing to get home for work. Celine didn't protest. Declan smirked like he'd won something. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit in the driveway for a few minutes before I could even start the engine. I left their house that night knowing something had shifted. They weren't asking anymore. They were warning me. And soon, I'd learn how far they'd go to make me obey. It started with a text from Celine 2 days later. "Come over tonight. We need to talk this out. Just us." No apology, no acknowledgement of the disaster that last dinner had been, just another command, wrapped in thin civility. For a moment, I hovered over the keyboard, thinking of ignoring it, but the little voice inside me, trained from years of being the good daughter, the good sister, told me to go, to keep the peace. I drove there after dark, my headlights cutting through the quiet suburban streets. My stomach churned as I parked in their driveway. The house loomed, warm light spilling out of the kitchen window, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was walking into a trap. When I stepped inside, Celine wasn't there. Instead, I found Declan in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, a beer dangling from his hand. He didn't even bother to greet me, just stared, his eyes flat and glassy, a faint grin playing at the corner of his mouth. "So," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "still think you're too good to help us out?" I kept my tone even, though my pulse was pounding. "I'm not too good for anything. I just need to make sure this is the right decision. It's a big commitment, Declan." He barked a laugh, taking a long drink before slamming the bottle down on the counter. "Big commitment. It's a signature, Kaylin. That's all. But you like to make things complicated, don't you? Always gotta be the smart one." Before I could answer, Celine appeared, leaning in the doorway. Arms crossed, she looked more like his ally than my sister. Her face was calm, but there was no kindness in her eyes. "Kaylin," she said, with a voice that could have cut glass, "you're making this harder than it needs to be. It's just a signature." "Why are you being so dramatic?" I turned toward her, desperate to reach the person I thought I still knew. This isn't about drama. This isn't about family anymore. This is about me protecting myself. Her eyebrows lifted, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of something. Guilt, maybe. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Protecting yourself from what? Your own family? You sound paranoid." "I'm being careful," I said quietly. Declan pushed off the counter, closing the distance between us. "No," he said, stepping into my space. "You're being a problem." My instincts screamed at me to back away, but I stood my ground. "You don't get to talk to me like that." His smirk widened. "Oh, I'll talk to you however I want." Before I could react, he shoved me hard against the counter. The sharp edge dug into my back, and pain shot through my shoulder. My breath hitched. "Declan!" I shouted, trying to push him off, but his hand gripped my arm, forcing me in place. Then came the punch. It was so fast I barely registered it, just the sharp, blinding pain across my face, the taste of iron flooding my mouth, and the floor rushing up to meet me. I crumpled onto the cold tiles, my cheek pressed against them, the world spinning. My shoulder throbbed with a pain so intense it made me nauseous. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked up, dazed, expecting, hoping, for Celine to help. Instead, she crouched down, her face close to mine. I could smell her perfume, sickly sweet, cloying, and her words were barely above a whisper. "You should have just signed." No anger, no concern, just cold finality. She stood up, and together they walked out of the kitchen, leaving me there like I was nothing. I don't know how long I stayed on that floor. Minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning. All I could feel was the throbbing in my face, the stabbing in my shoulder, and the crushing weight of realization. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just pressure. This was a message. I was never their sister. I was their insurance policy. And I lay there, bleeding and broken, wondering how family could leave me like that. And then I remembered, I still had parents. Maybe they'd help me. It took everything I had to get up from that kitchen floor. My cheek throbbed, my shoulder screamed every time I moved, and yet I managed to stagger to my car. The winter air bit at my skin as I gripped the steering wheel with my good arm. Every bump in the road sent waves of pain through my body, but I kept driving. Their house was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like hours. I whispered to myself as I drove, like a prayer I wasn't sure I believed. They're my parents. They may not love me like they love Celine, but they won't turn me away. They can't. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my vision blurred with tears and the snowflakes that had begun to fall. Their porch light was off, the house dark except for a faint glow in the living room window. I sat in my car for a moment, trembling, trying to gather the courage to get out. When I finally did, my knees nearly buckled. I made my way up the front steps, one shaky step at a time, and started pounding on the door. "Mom! Dad! It's me!" My voice cracked. "Please! I need help! Please!" The sound of my fists hitting the door echoed in the quiet night. I pounded again, harder this time, my shoulder screaming in protest. "Please open the door! I'm hurt! I just need you!" A light flicked on inside. My heart leapt. I pressed my ear against the door and heard movement, whispers. Claudette's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Please," I sobbed. "It's Kaylin. I'm your daughter. I need you." I stood there waiting for the lock to click, for the door to open, for my mother to rush out and hold me like she used to when I scraped my knees as a child. But the lock never turned. The whispers stopped. The house fell silent again. I kept knocking, kept begging. "Please, I have nowhere else to go. Don't leave me out here." My breath came out in clouds, the cold seeping into my bones. Minutes dragged by like hours. My strength drained, my legs giving out as I sank onto the porch, my back against the door. I hugged myself with my good arm, shivering, bleeding onto their welcome mat, the one that said "Family First" in big, cheerful letters. That's when it hit me. They were in there. They knew it was me, and they had chosen not to help. A different kind of pain set in, one far worse than the dislocated shoulder or the split lip. It was the pain of knowing that my parents, my last hope, had looked at each other and decided I wasn't worth opening the door for. My sobs grew quieter. Eventually, I just stared at the snow-covered steps, numb to everything but the hollow ache in my chest. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point, a voice cut through the silence. "Oh my God! Are you okay?" I turned my head weakly. A neighbor, a woman I'd only seen a handful of times, was standing at the end of the walkway, phone in hand. Before I could answer, she was dialing. "Stay with me. I'm calling 911. Soon, the distant wail of sirens grew louder until red and blue lights washed over the white snow. EMTs rushed toward me, their voices calm but urgent. "Ma'am, can you hear me? We're here to help." I nodded faintly, tears spilling over again. Not from pain this time, but from the shame of it all. Strangers cared more than my own blood. One of them gently examined my shoulder. "Looks dislocated. Let's get her stabilized." They lifted me carefully onto a stretcher, wrapping me in a blanket as if to shield me from the bitter night and everything that had come before it. A police officer crouched beside me, his tone soft but steady. "You're safe now. We'll take care of you." Safe. The word felt foreign. As they wheeled me toward the ambulance, I glanced back at the house one last time. The light in the living room had gone out. The house looked empty again. That was the night I stopped being their daughter. Because that's when I saw what Celine had done to make me look like the villain. Morning light streamed through the blinds when I woke up in my townhouse. My arm throbbed in its sling, and the dull haze of the pain medication left me disoriented for a few seconds before reality crashed back. The kitchen tiles, Celine's cold face, Declan's fist, my parents' closed door. It all hit me at once, and I curled up tighter on the couch, wishing I could erase it like a bad dream. The house was so quiet it almost made me uneasy. No one was here to tell me what to do, no one to demand an explanation or push paperwork across a table. But there was no comfort in that silence. It was the kind that screams at you, reminding you how alone you really are. I reached for my phone on the coffee table. Dozens of missed calls, but not from the people I needed. Nothing from my parents, nothing from Celine. Instead, a string of unread messages lit up the family group chat. I tapped it, knowing I shouldn't. My name dragged through the dirt. Claudette. Kaylin has gone too far this time. Malcolm. She needs help. She's embarrassing herself. And Celine, always the master of pretending to be gentle. Pray for my sister. She's struggling. My hand tightened around the phone. A knock at the door startled me, and I flinched before realizing who it must be. "Kaylin?" Margie's voice. I forced myself up, cradling my arm, and opened the door. Margie stood there with 2 coffees and that worried look she always wore when she knew I was holding it together by threads. "You look awful," she said softly, stepping inside without waiting for me to invite her. "Here." She pressed a cup into my good hand. "I guess that's the new family motto," I muttered, sinking back onto the couch. Margie hesitated, setting her cup down. "Before you see this somewhere else, I need to show you something." The way she said it made my stomach drop. "What now?" She unlocked her phone and turned the screen toward me. A video. It took me a second to process what I was looking at. It was me, on the kitchen floor. My face streaked with blood, tears streaming, barely able to move. But it wasn't the whole scene. The clip had been cut, chopped up, stripped of context, and over it, Celine had added a caption. "Please keep Kaylin in your prayers. She's hurting right now and had an episode. Please don't judge." An episode. I watched myself through their lens, an unstable woman who had somehow done this to herself. They'd taken my pain and twisted it into a performance. My mouth went dry. "She posted this?" "In her little friends-only Facebook circle," Margie said bitterly. "But you know how that works. Half the family's already seen it. Probably half of Boulder, too." The coffee in my hand suddenly felt like dead weight. She made me look like I'm dangerous. Like I did this to myself. Margie didn't argue. She didn't need to. We both knew exactly what Celine was doing. "She's controlling the narrative," Margie said finally. "And you're letting her." My head snapped up. What am I supposed to do? Go online and fight her in the comments? That's exactly what she wants. Me to look hysterical. No. Margie leaned forward, her voice steady. You press charges. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is assault, and now it's defamation. You need to do something. I stared at her like she'd just suggested I burn the house down. Press charges? Against my own sister? Against Declan? You think anyone's going to believe me after that video? They already think I'm— I couldn't even finish the sentence. They're counting on you to stay quiet, Margie said firmly. That's why you can't. Kaylin, this is how people like them win. They bank on you being too scared to make it ugly. I wanted to believe her. But every part of me had been wired since childhood to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to swallow my pride so my family could stay intact. My parents used to call it being the good daughter. It felt more like being the expendable one. I don't know if I can, I whispered, ashamed of how small I sounded. Margie placed her hand over mine. Then you have to decide. Do you want to keep living like their scapegoat? Or do you want your life back? Her words lingered long after she left. By late afternoon, I found myself at my kitchen table with my laptop open. The screen stared back at me, blank and waiting. My hands trembled as I clicked New Folder. I typed one word into the name field. Evidence. I sat there staring at it, my pulse in my ears. This was my first step. A tiny one, but still, it was mine. But before I could fight, I had to face an even crueler truth. My entire family was ready to cut me out. And they didn't even try to hide it. It was late in the evening when my phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the stillness of my townhouse. I almost didn't answer, but when I saw my mother's name on the screen, I felt a strange flicker of hope. Maybe she'd come around. Maybe she finally understood what had happened. I pressed accept. Kaylin. Claudette's voice was icy, controlled in that way she used when she wanted me to know she was disappointed, but too dignified to yell. Mom, I said, my throat dry. She cut me off. You've embarrassed this family. What you did to Celine and Declan is unforgivable. If you keep attacking them, you're no daughter of mine. The words stung, though I shouldn't have been surprised. That quiet hope I had, that they'd come running to my side, that they'd care that I was beaten and bleeding, evaporated in an instant. Mom, I didn't— Enough, her voice sharpened. You've always been difficult, Kaylin. But this is too far. We can't have people thinking our family raises someone like this. There was movement on the other end, like my father was in the room. Dad? I asked, my voice cracking. No response. Not even a breath. Is he there? Can he at least talk to me? He agrees with me, she said simply. If you had an ounce of respect left for this family, you'd apologize. Until then, don't call us. And then the line went dead. I sat there for a while, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. I didn't cry. I think I'd run out of tears somewhere on that kitchen floor 2 nights ago. Hours later, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I saw it. A public Facebook post from my mother. Prayers for our eldest daughter, Celine, as she handles false accusations with grace. We stand by her. Some people you can't help, no matter how much you love them. I read it 3 times. My mother didn't just turn her back on me. She'd buried me, publicly, for all her church friends and our extended family to see. And she did it with that same sugar-sweet tone she'd always used to make her cruelty sound righteous. The humiliation was bone deep. They didn't just choose Celine, they erased me. I closed my eyes, and my mind drifted to a memory I hadn't thought of in years. 12 years old. Sitting on the living room floor, folding laundry while Celine preened in front of a mirror, trying on dresses for some school dance. Mom fussed over her hair while Dad stood in the doorway, smiling like she was the only daughter he had. Me? I was invisible. That was my role. Quiet, useful, invisible. But invisibility wasn't protection. It was submission. Now, sitting in my empty townhouse, bruised and aching, I saw it clearly. They'd groomed me to stay small so they could use me when it suited them. That was what keeping the peace had really meant. The anger came slowly at first, like embers under ash. Then it grew. I opened my laptop and clicked on the folder I'd named Evidence. It was empty, waiting for me. I started to fill it. First, I scanned the medical reports from the hospital, detailing my dislocated shoulder and facial injuries. Then, the photos I'd forced myself to take of my bruises that morning, my hand shaking as I held the phone. I pulled up the family group chat, taking screenshots of every message that painted me as unstable or violent, every text from Celine and Declan, every post, click, save, click, save. With each file I added, I felt a little less like their victim and a little more like a person reclaiming her life. They thought they could destroy me quietly, like I'd just roll over and let them. But funerals aren't always for the dead. Sometimes they're for the living who finally decided to rise. And rising meant doing the one thing they never expected, fighting back. But first, I had to face them one last time, in the room where they thought they still had power over me. The call came just after 3 in the afternoon. I had been sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen, trying to make sense of the growing pile of evidence I'd been gathering. My arm ached in its sling, my bruises ached more, but it was the silence from my family that weighed on me the most. When I saw my mother's name flash across the screen, my chest tightened. I answered, bracing myself. "Kaylin," Claudette said, her tone clipped yet oddly performative, as though she were speaking to an audience instead of her daughter. "Come for dinner tonight. We need to settle this like a family." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I almost declined. Every instinct in me screamed that this was a setup. But something else, a gnawing need to see them, to gauge how far they were willing to go, made me say, "Fine." "What time?" "5, she said simply, then hung up. By late afternoon, I was pulling into their driveway. My parents' house, with its perfectly trimmed hedges and neat little porch, looked exactly the same as it always had. But as I stepped out of my car, it felt different, colder. Inside, the smell of roast chicken and mashed potatoes greeted me. Comfort food, carefully chosen. A performance of normalcy. "Kaylin," Claudette said as I walked in, her smile tight, her eyes calculating. She kissed my cheek like we weren't on opposite sides of a battlefield. The dining room was already set. Celine sat at the far end of the table, perfectly composed, her makeup flawless. Declan leaned back in his chair, a beer in his hand, his eyes fixed on me with that same simmering hostility I'd seen in his kitchen days ago. My father, Malcolm, was in his usual place at the head of the table, staring down at his plate as if it might offer him some kind of escape. "Let's eat," Claudette said brightly, as though this were any other family meal. I sat, feeling every muscle in my body tense. For a few minutes, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of cutlery on plates. Then Claudette broke the silence. "If you could just be reasonable, Kaylin," she said softly, like she was delivering some kind of wisdom. "None of this would have happened. Families don't survive when one person insists on making everything difficult." I didn't answer. Celine leaned forward, her expression the picture of sincerity, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I'm sorry things got out of hand," she said, her voice quivering just enough to sound real. "I overreacted, but you can't destroy our lives over one mistake. Just let it go, Kaylin. Please, for all of us." Her performance would have been Oscar-worthy if I didn't know the woman underneath. I looked at her, at those carefully placed tears, and felt nothing, no guilt, no sympathy, just disgust. "Celine," I said quietly, "you didn't overreact. You orchestrated this." Her face hardened, the act slipping for a fraction of a second before she caught herself. Declan slammed his beer onto the table, the sound sharp and violent. "You think you can just walk around acting like you're better than us? If you drag us to court, I'll make sure you regret it. Career, reputation, everything. I'll ruin you." The words hung in the air. Claudette didn't flinch. Celine didn't blink. My father didn't speak. He just stared at his plate, his silence louder than anything he could have said. Something in me shifted then. The last threads of guilt, the last pieces of hope I'd been clinging to, snapped. They weren't trying to reconcile. They weren't even pretending. This wasn't about making peace. It was about control, about putting me back in my place. But I wasn't the same woman who used to fold herself small to fit in their picture-perfect family portrait. I smiled faintly, pushing back my chair. "Thanks for the dinner," I said, my voice steady. "I'll think about it." Declan sneered, thinking he'd scared me into submission. Celine dabbed at her eyes like her little performance had worked. Claudette gave me that approving nod she always gave when she thought she'd gotten her way. But as I walked out, I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady for the first time in days. I texted Aya. "It's time." Driving away, I didn't feel fear anymore, just resolve. They thought I was bluffing. They had no idea I'd already set the court date. The next time we'd share a room, it wouldn't be over dinner. It would be under oath. And I wasn't the only one who came prepared. The courthouse felt colder than the February air outside. The polished floors, the echo of footsteps, the low hum of murmurs from other cases, it all made my heart pound harder. I kept my head up, walking alongside Aya, my lawyer, who had the kind of quiet confidence I needed to borrow that morning. Celine and Declan were already seated when we entered the courtroom. She wore an immaculate white dress, a shade too bright for the room, her hair perfectly smoothed into place. Declan was in a navy suit, his jaw tight, posture rigid, both of them performing for sympathy. Claudette and Malcolm sat right behind them, arms folded, faces stony, glaring at me as if I were the embarrassment here. Aya leaned toward me. "They'll go low." "Expect it," she said softly, and I nodded, gripping the edge of the table. The judge entered, and the room stilled. "This is a hearing regarding the matter of Kaylin Hartman versus Celine and Declan Price," he announced. Their lawyer rose first, a man with a sharp suit and a sharper tongue. "Your Honor, my clients have been the target of false allegations. Ms. Hartman has a long history of emotional instability, and the incident in question was self-inflicted. My clients acted only in self-defense when she became erratic." Celine dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed there were no tears. Then came the video. They played it on the large monitor, a chopped-up, distorted version of that night. It showed me crying on their kitchen floor, but the context was gone. It looked like I was out of control, incoherent. Then they submitted written statements. Claudette's character reference was read aloud. Kaylin has always been prone to outbursts. As her mother, I have tried for years to help her manage her emotions. I felt my stomach twist. My own mother had put her name to that. When it was our turn, Aya stood with the calm authority of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "Your Honor, what my clients just showed you was a performance. Let's look at the facts." She pulled up the first document on the screen, my ER report, time-stamped. "These injuries," Aya said, pointing at the line item, "are consistent with blunt force trauma. The attending physician specifically noted they could not have been self-inflicted." Then she projected a screenshot of a text from Celine. "You should have just signed." Gasps rippled through the room. Aya didn't stop. "And finally, we have security footage from a neighbor's camera. You'll see Mr. Price leaving the house moments after the assault, while Ms. Hartman was left on the floor, injured." The video played. Silence fell over the courtroom. Celine's mask slipped for the first time, her eyes wide, lips pressed thin. Declan shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenching and unclenching. "This is not a family dispute," Aya said, her voice like steel. "This is an assault, compounded by defamation." Declan shot up, ready to speak, but the judge cut him off. "Enough. Sit down." I felt a strange stillness in me. Not relief, not yet, but a calmness, knowing that their lies were finally unraveling in front of strangers who could see them for what they were. The judge looked over the evidence, then at us. The request for a restraining order against Ms. Hartman is denied. And let me be clear, if these fabricated materials continue to circulate, you may face criminal liability. It wasn't the sweeping justice I'd imagined in my darkest nights, but it was enough to shake their confidence, enough to remind them I wasn't theirs to break anymore. As I walked out of that courtroom, my head high, I didn't look back at them. And as I walked out of that courtroom, I knew exactly what kind of life I wanted to build, one they could never touch again. And the first step was redefining what family meant to me. It was a quiet November morning, the kind where the cold presses against the windows and seeps through the cracks, reminding you winter isn't just coming, it's here. I stood at my front door, holding a tray of freshly baked rolls, my hands steady. For a moment, I stared at my fingers. These were the same hands that once pounded on my parents' door, swollen and bruised, begging for help that never came. That night, I had been left on a porch, bleeding, small and desperate. Now I was standing on the inside of my own home, opening my door for people who actually wanted to walk through it. Aya was the first to arrive, balancing a pie dish and a stack of case files, because of course she couldn't fully unplug even on Friendsgiving. "Don't judge," she said, laughing. "Pumpkin pie and legal briefs, both essential." Behind her came Margie, with a massive casserole in her arms. "You look better than the last time I saw you in this doorway," she said, squeezing my good shoulder gently. And Eudora, my neighbor who had once only been a polite wave across the lawn, carried in a mismatched set of mugs, insisting we needed more coffee options. We spread the food across my thrift store table, pies in chipped ceramic dishes, mashed potatoes in a pot with a handle that wobbled, folding chairs creaking under the weight of real people with real love to give. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm. "This isn't what I imagined Thanksgiving would look like," I said aloud, half to them and half to myself. Margie clinked her fork against her glass. "It's Friendsgiving. Upgrade." We all laughed, and I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying for months. This wasn't the family I was born with, but it was the one I chose, and more importantly, it was the one that chose me back. A few days earlier, a letter had arrived in the mail. Celine's handwriting was instantly recognizable, looping and precise. My stomach churned as I opened it. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a plea, thinly veiled manipulation, begging me to let things go for the sake of family. I'd torn it in half before finishing it, watching the pieces fall into the recycling bin. Some doors stay closed for a reason. Now, surrounded by people who'd stood by me when my blood relatives didn't, I felt the sharp echo of that night I'd begged behind a locked door. But this was different. This time, I was the one deciding who came in. "They tried to teach me that family meant obedience," I said softly, surprising even myself with how much the words felt like a declaration. "But I've learned something else. Family is the door you choose to walk through, and the people you let walk through it with you." Aya raised her glass. "To chosen family," she said. We all joined in, the sound of our glasses clinking, filling the room like a bell. As dinner wound down and everyone settled into easy conversation, I stepped out onto the balcony. The winter air bit at my cheeks, but it felt good. It felt real. I thought about everything that had happened, the blood on Celine's kitchen tiles, the silence from my parents, the courtroom where my truth finally saw daylight. And then I thought about now. This little rented townhouse, mismatched furniture, a table full of people who didn't see me as collateral, but as Kaylin. "I used to think strength meant never breaking," I whispered to myself, letting the cold air fill my lungs. "But real strength is what you grow in the cracks." I took one last look at the glowing room behind me, laughter spilling through the half-open door. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to open the door for me. I'd already opened my own,